Welcome to the Peacebuilding Practitioner, a resource page and podcast for people working on conflict, on peacebuilding, and on social justice issues. My name is Björn Eser, and I'm the founder of and shaker and maker behind the Peacebuilding Practitioner. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Peacebuilding Practitioners podcast. Season 3 is all about digital peacebuilding, this highly complex, tremendously exciting, often messy and quickly developing intersection where emerging technologies and the digital world on the one hand and conflict transformation, peacebuilding, human rights and social justice work on the other hand meet. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Helena Puig Larrauri from BuildUp. She's the co-founder and strategy lead at BuildUp at the moment. Helena specializes in the integration of digital technology and innovation in peace process, and she has quite a keen interest in civic dialogues. And for us here especially is her understanding of conflict drivers and how they show up in digital spaces. So welcome, Helena. It's a great pleasure having you on today's episode of the Peacebuilding Practitioners podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great. Thanks for making the time. Helena, I introduced you a bit. What else do you think the audience should know about you before we actually dive into the topic so that they have an idea where's all this information coming from?
I think maybe one thing that's useful to know is that I come from the peace building field and not from the technology field. So I'm a peace builder who interacts frequently with technologists. I'm not a technologist who has gone into peace building. I used to work at UNDP. I ran a peace building program in Sudan for a number of years, and I'm still actually an advisor to the UN's DPPA. So I think that journey from peace building to technology is what has informed a lot of what I will be sharing today.
Great. That's very close to my heart. I'm also coming from that side and only recently dived into digital peace building, but it's great because on some of the other shows, which will run partly before your interview and partly after your interview, there are people who come from the tech side or people who come from completely different sides. So I think that should be quite informative. Before we get started, you say you come from the peace building side with plenty of hands-on experience or proven track record of decades in the field. So before we get started, what is actually the definition, so to speak, you work with when we talk about digital peace building? What is it that forms your understanding in this still emerging and partly also disputed field and the terminology we use?
I think digital peace building is comprised of three things, and people sometimes don't know which one they're talking about or aren't clear about which one they're talking about. I think it is firstly how we refer to peace building programs that use digital tools, leverage digital tools to increase the reach or impact of their work. So that's one aspect. So that could be, for example, if you are using some kind of digital forum or digital tool to run a national consultation on reconciliation. That could be an example.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
I think the second aspect of digital peace building is when we look at how conflict is unfolding in a digital space, and then we design a peace building intervention to address that digital conflict driver.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we are seeing that polarization is rising around an electoral cycle, and that is leading to violence, and that polarization is manifesting particularly strongly on social media, then we might want to intervene in social media with a peace-building intervention. Now, that peace-building intervention might be using a digital tool. So It might be that what we want to do is run a campaign on Facebook, or it might not be. It might be that what we need to do is have a dialogue between the political parties about how they behave on social media. So this is sort of a traditional peace-building intervention that addresses a digital conflict driver. So I think that's the second aspect of digital peace-building.
Yeah.
And I think the third, which maybe is the most contested, is...
Let's hear it and we see.
Yeah. Is essentially how peace building can inform the design and affordances of technologies. So specifically, an understanding of social cohesion and of conflict drivers and of conflict transformation can and should inform how particularly digital media platforms are designed.
Yeah, great. I think that's really good to know for us, kind of having these three different aspects. And as you said, probably the last one is the one which is most contested or where we have also most problems coming to terms to.
Yeah.
While seeing it every day in our lives. And at the same time, I think there's lots of great stuff happening, especially if we take a rather wide approach on peace building, social justice issues. And I think just yesterday, I think it just came out yesterday, the new book from Joy from the Algorithm Justice League, Unmasking AI. I started listening to it this morning. and others, the weapons of math destruction and others, I think where we at least come closer together and get a better understanding. Great. So now that we have your understanding, and probably keep that in mind, audience out there, if we now look at the work of BuildUp, and you've been around for some time, and you specifically set out to say, we want to transform conflict in the digital age, and we want to look at, I think you call it, new tools for old problems and old tools for new problems. And especially, you just mentioned social cohesion, and what does it mean having new dynamics influencing conflict on the driver side, as well as on the possibility, the potential to address them side. So what is currently the work that BuildUp is doing? What's the most thrilling part of it? What's the most challenging part of it?
Maybe I'm going to use those three categories of digital peace building to answer this question, just to keep it simple. I think when BuildUp started, we were very squarely in the first category.
Okay.
And our motivation was basically, this was 10 years ago. It was the time when hackathons were very popular, right? And so the idea of a hackathon is you throw a big policy problem at a bunch of coders and a bunch of techies, and they'll somehow hack it. So, you could hack peace, or you could hack health, or you could hack public education, or whatever it was. And I think, there was a lot of energy behind that. But I also felt, having attended a lot of those hackathons and a lot of programs that were designed with that in mind, that it was very naive. Because actually, most public problems, and of course, conflict transformation and peace building is no exception, are extremely complex. And so my sense was that what you needed was actually to teach peace builders to be better product managers. In other words, to teach peace builders to instruct and work with technologists on solutions that would address their problems. So that was the start of BuildUp. The idea of BuildUp is, how can we basically, a lot of the work that we do and that we continue to do now, is we work with local organizations around the world. We look at their ongoing peace building programming, and we have a process by which we discuss where here would a technology that increases your reach or impact really be transformational to your program. And then we work to kind of either, take something off the shelf and just adapt it, or build something in order to achieve that goal, and then hand it over and make it sustainable within the programs. So if you want, I can give a concrete example. So right now,
that would be nice.
So right now, I'm involved in a project at BuildUp that's working in Guinea-Bissau with an organization called Rushdie Buzz, which is a local NGO that's been working in peace building for many years. And they collect a lot of information about incidents of conflict and how local reconciliation mechanisms are working on them. And then they write these reports, and basically very few people read the reports. That happens to a lot of peace building NGOs. And also their idea is to really involve more people in kind of discussing, okay, if we know this is what's happening, what do we need to ask of the local government? And also, what can we do as a community? And one of the challenges in having those discussions is it's expensive. It's expensive to get people together, etc. So we looked at all of that, and what we are doing right now is we're building a very simple WhatsApp bot that will walk people through the report. So rather than getting a PDF report, they get a little message from the bot that says, okay, would you like to look at the different actors, the different themes, the different resolution mechanisms, etc. And then they just get basically a series of infographics and videos that can walk them through the report. But it's all interactive on a WhatsApp bot. WhatsApp is very accessible, so it's a good way of doing it as well. And then at the end of it, it offers them the possibility of engaging in a discussion forum, essentially, where they can post. So there's a question, which is essentially, how do they think that, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's basically, how do you think that responses to these conflict incidents should be managed? And they can input their response, but they can also vote on other people's responses. It uses a platform called, it's a platform called Polis, which I think is really great as a solution. So that's like an example of the kind of work.
Oh, that's great. You just mentioned that. And I think all of us in the field know this thing of, even if you have the most thrilling data, the most pioneering research, maybe with involvement of people who hardly ever have their voices heard and can do it in their own language. And then, as you said, it rots away on a shelf somewhere. And not just that the resources might not be put to best use, but also that the insights are very often then being lost.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of that people actually are led through, and through their engagement find what they're actually looking for, but at the same time stumble across other jewels and other people's opinions and takes on these things, I think it's great. Is that an off-the-shelf software, or is it something you developed, or is it something which is in between, something which is open source, can be adapted and yield results in whatever environment, in whatever tech environment and digital literacy environment we're faced with?
As with most of the work that we do in this type of intervention, it's not like we've developed a software or we like have purchased a really expensive software. It's more like we've taken all these little bits, and what we've done is we've put together a really nice process. So it's actually really simple. We are building a bot, an interactive WhatsApp bot, using a thing called LandBot. You need a subscription, but it's an off-the-shelf bot builder. And so we're building that bot. And then when you get to the end of it, you get a link to the consultation platform that we're using. It's called Polis. Polis is open source and free to use. And so that's also kind of, like we're just using that. But I think what's interesting is like, okay, so you've got this, but like the point is we've put the two together. And also we have a way of getting this out to the people who need to be engaging with it, right? So it crosses around those tools. That is, I think, what's actually digital peace building as opposed to two digital tools.
I think it's a great example. And it's nice to see how tech and also some of the things which very often have I think also for good reasons, a bad reputation, some of the Meta products and WhatsApp and others, we say, well, how can we still make use? Because that's what people use. That's where people feel confident with. And that's just what we have to work with. I think it's an amazing example.
Yeah. So you asked me, what is the kind of work that we're doing? And I said, this is where we started.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say next is that, about 5 years into doing these kinds of projects, which we still do loads of, obviously, witness this one that I just gave as an example, we realized that a lot of the local organizations that we were working with were really struggling with the conflict drivers that they were seeing appearing particularly in social media, but also in other digital media and other digital spaces. And so we started looking at what could be done about that. And so a very big area of our work right now is to help peace building organizations better understand what we call digital conflict drivers, which is mostly essentially polarization and hateful narratives and incitement to violence on social media and other digital media. And so we do a lot of analysis. We do a lot of social media listening and analysis in this respect to support conflict analysis. And then we work with organizations to design interventions in social media. To give a concrete example, we are currently working on a project in the Netherlands. And I'm very deliberately using this example because I also want to point out that peace building isn't something that doesn't happen in Europe and North America. It also happens there. And what we're doing here is we're essentially looking at how racist and anti-immigration narratives are appearing on social media, and then working with a group of young people to decide, based on this analysis, what kind of interventions in those narratives would work. If you want, we could call them micro-influencers. So they're people who are already active on social media. And then what can they do to essentially shift those narratives? So this kind of work we do in a lot of places as well.
If you just say we're listening in, we're working with data to analyze hate speech, creating fearful environments, even if they're within the guidelines of the various platforms, it can still be a conflict driver by creating an environment where people just feel intimidated, not be able to speak their minds, not be able to engage in relevant discussions around these social topics. But how do you find the right balance with your approach between hovering up data, using data, working with statistics and other insights, and at the same time not falling into or following the same business model, the clickbait capitalism, the Orwellian surveillance, and the big algorithms? How do you make sure you have a balanced approach, which you have the feeling is working with data in an ethical way?
I guess the quick answer is we don't do clickbaity campaigns.
I was assuming so.
We tend to do a lot more human resource intensive interventions, where what we're trying to do is have groups of individuals behave differently on social media as a way of demonstrating that a different way of being on social media is possible. Now, what I would say is that sometimes it feels like the odds are very badly stacked against us. Because of the algorithmic driving of clickbaity and sort of nudging towards more polarizing content that you just mentioned. So I think that experience, realizing that the odds are really stacked against us when we do this kind of work, is actually what has led us to increasingly become perhaps not active, but certainly commenting on that third pillar of digital peace building, which is around essentially the affordances and the design of social media platforms. So I recently co-authored this paper on the algorithmic management of polarization and violence on social media with two colleagues, Jonathan Stray and Ravi Iyer. And what that looks at is just how difficult it is and what could be done to make it less difficult to do the kind of peace building and social cohesion work that we try to do. So That's my answer. My answer is that we try to model solutions that are not essentially leveraging surveillance capitalism. But that means that sometimes it can be much harder to get our message across and our methods across. And so what we're trying to do now is to begin to advocate for the need for a different design that will make these kinds of interventions more impactful.
Yeah. You just mentioned a study, and I must admit, I haven't read it. I haven't even looked it up. I didn't even know about it. Shame on me. Helena, what were some of the key insights where you said, okay, it's an uphill struggle. It's, the odds are not really stacked in our favor here. So what are some of the main findings in terms of challenges? But you also said, well, there is something we can do, or there's something at least we can be aware of and work with as a peace building, social justice, conflict transformation community that is interested in social cohesion, in diversity, in not extreme positions, but in creating understanding. What are some of the insights that would be worth sharing with the audience here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main insights from this piece of writing that we did is that, we know that social media platforms have largely responded to conflict through content moderation thus far. But moderation will never affect more than a small amount of objectively policy violating content. And when you expand content moderation, often what happens is that there's a lot more backtracking, a lot more biased enforcement, and a lot of controversy. And I think, a very current example of that is what is happening with Palestinian voices on a lot of the social media platforms, and the fact that there has been a lot of biased enforcement. One of the most egregious examples of that is that for a period of time, if you entered Palestine in your profile on Instagram, in the automatic translation, Meta added terrorist. And they have admitted this. It's public knowledge. There's articles about this, but they haven't explained how that happened. So this kind of issue, makes us think content moderation isn't going to be a great solution. So instead, what we look at in the paper is we look at essentially experiences that show that platforms often incentivize conflict actors towards more divisive and potentially violence-inducing speech, and also facilitate mass harassment and manipulation. And what we propose in the paper is that platforms monitor for the conflict-relevant side effects of prioritizing distribution based on engagement. So things like incentivizing divisive content, etc., and that they stop optimizing for certain engagement signals. So, for example, they stop optimizing for comments, shares, or time spent in sensitive contexts. We also look a little bit at how it might be possible for platforms to support the transformation from sort of destructive to constructive conflict by drawing attention to cross-cutting content using things like bridge-based ranking. There's a lot more in there, but I hope that gives a sense.
Yeah, that's great. And probably also an incentive for the audience to actually have a look at that report without a chatbot walking you through. I think you probably still have to read it all by yourself, but I think that sounds great. And I'm sure going to put it on my reading list. Helena, I must admit, I first heard about BuildUp when I was looking for social media engagement and hate speech and what does it mean in terms of conflict drivers. And I heard about the program Phoenix, the platform Phoenix, which I found on your website. Is there something you want to talk about here? Is that something that nicely links with what we have talked about so far?
Yeah, so Phoenix is basically a tool set that we have developed in-house to support the social media analysis that I was describing earlier. So what we found when we started doing social media listening and analysis was that the off-the-shelf products that were out there were either prohibitively expensive for the kinds of organizations we work with, including ourselves. If they weren't prohibitively expensive, they were built for commercial purposes. So they were basically built for marketing campaigns, for engaging with surveillance capitalism, not for the kind of analysis that peace builders and mediators need to do.
Yeah.
So we started very scrappily in-house to develop our own way of doing things. And then eventually we've kind of packaged all of the tool sets that we use. They're all open source into this thing that we're calling Phoenix. So at the moment, Phoenix is an open source tool set, which you do need to be a little familiar with some coding to be able to run, but all the instructions are available and all the code is available. And our plan next year is to turn it into a platform where you just log in and you can do what you need to do. And what the tool set does is it essentially gathers, tabulates, classifies, and then visualizes social media data. And one of the most interesting things about that is actually that third piece, the classification piece, because what that allows peace builders to do is create their own classification models, which when you get to large amounts of data, if you want to look at hate speech, you need to find the hate speech in, the sea of data that you're getting. And so being able to build a classification model that automates that is really powerful.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds exciting. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. So people who want to learn more about the current state of the set of tools, but also keep up on what's happening over the next couple of months, should probably look that up. You just said you're coming from the peace building field, and then you had a look at teasing around or playing around with tech issues. And I think you come across as very confident in talking about tech. If you look at tech developments in the last couple of months and years, and also what we think will happen in the next year or 2 or 3, what are things in the emerging technologies, digital domains area that really make you hopeful in terms of social cohesion and peace work? And what are some of the things where you really think, this looks like another added challenge to our field of work?
I think one thing that I've been worried about for a long time, and I'm more worried about now, is the added confusion that the increasing availability of AI brings to lots of things, including to conflict transformation work.
Yeah.
So I think that the biases in AI have an impact on conflict drivers. And I'm speaking slowly because I'm still figuring out how. And I think we all still are figuring out how. I don't think that's just me. And I don't think I quite understand the depth of that impact on conflict drivers. And I think that's also true about the availability of generative tools. So like a lot of the sort of like the ability to essentially produce deep fakes. We've been looking at Sudan quite a lot, and there's been these instances. One of them is confirmed, the others we don't know, of deep fakes of Omar al-Bashir, the ousted president of Sudan, speaking about conflict issues, but they weren't real, right? But they went out over social media and have further aggravated what was already an incredibly confused, very information poor conflict context. And I just think, oh man, like another thing to deal with. So that's one thing. But the weird thing is that you also asked me about like things that make me hopeful. And it's kind of also the availability of AI.
Okay. In what sense? In what sense?
I think that the possibilities for meaningful, broad-based consultation are massively enhanced. So what I mean by meaningful is that like broad-based consultation that allows both for many people to feel heard and for that hearing to result in some kind of finding of common ground. I think there's enormous possibility there.
Yeah, that is good to hear, because I must admit, I find AI fascinating, the little I understand about it. But my fascination is very much on the, I'm shocked again side. And when I see potential, very often it's in other fields. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm battling with a few disabilities, and especially an above knee amputation. And so when I talk about health, when I talk about rehabilitation, I see lots of issues where I think, wow, AI is going to be a game changer and something where I see so much potential. And at the same time, when I think about what makes me hopeful in this whole peace building, conflict transformation, human rights, and associated fields, yes, I see a bit of potential, but I'm more on the hesitant side. And I'm much more worried about, as you said, generative, large scale, quick, not checkable visuals, which distort the whole thing between what are facts, what are news, what is journalism, and what is just nonsense. Sometimes funny nonsense and sometimes really scary nonsense. And then combining that with, the new computer power and financial interests. And if you scale up the troll factories from Prigozhin in 10 years ago, influencing elections and other social processes, and scaling that up with AI now, I'm really worried. And at the same time, I see some potential and find it great to hear from people on the ground like you to say, well, actually, in terms of large scale consultation, in terms of much more genuine, inclusive participation, I see potential. And not just, maybe a bit if I'm really creative, but full on good potential. That's great.
Yeah.
We're just talking about consultation, and there we come to a very human aspect. I know BuildUp is also very much interested in building a community of practice, building trusted face-to-face relations which nicely complement, interact with our online domains. You have regular conferences. How do you support, how do you further strengthen people in that community through your work and through the services and products you offer?
We have essentially 3 ways in which we interact with this community of practice, which has been slowly building for the past 10 years. One is the conference that you mentioned. So we run an annual conference, which is in person only, although we do make content available for others to engage with, but it really focuses on the in-person environment. And also my co-founder sometimes says, I don't know why we call it a conference. It's not really a conference. It feels more like a festival. And I think it is really, powerful. And the fact that we have so many repeat attendees, I think, is a good indication of the importance of that space. The second aspect is that we've been running for many years these fellowship programs where we work with a champion within an organization to introduce a digital tool, a peace building organization. And we have a sort of, regular meetups and irregular meetups and informal connections. We often end up working over and over with the same organizations. So we have a sort of a long commitment to supporting their work. So I think that sort of fellows network is quite important. And then I think the third aspect is that we produce free online courses that are meant as, entry level. You just want to know what digital peace building is, or you just want to know how strategic communications might work or how facilitation online works. And they're available on web, so you can take them online, or on WhatsApp, so you can take them on WhatsApp. We actually have quite a high uptake on WhatsApp, and some of the courses are available in multiple languages, so English, French, Spanish, and Arabic.
Great. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, great. And you just mentioned the conference. I never had the pleasure of going to one of these conferences. I missed the one in Germany last year, which is a pity because I'm based in Germany. I think the next one's coming up in Nairobi in first or second week of December, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Yeah, we are recording that show now 1st of November, so I'm not sure when it will be aired. Assuming it might be aired before the conference, can people still sign up? Who can attend, and where do they find more information about it?
All the conference details are available on the conference website, which is just howtobuildpeace.org.
Okay.
The conference is on December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Nairobi at the Busara Center in Nairobi. And registration is open to the public, so anybody can attend. And we run a pay what you can model. So you can come for $1, you can come for $300. And we reuse that funding to offer travel support to people who are contributing to the conference in some way. So every year we run an open call for contributors, so speakers and workshop organizers and artists. That closed in June, but those people are then supported as much as we can to attend the conference. And then registration just to attend the conference is open until we run out of tickets. We are quite subscribed this year, I would say. It's also our 10th anniversary, which maybe is why, I don't know. But there may be some tickets left. I don't know.
Great. And as I said, it might be that this show is actually running after it. If that is the case, if people missed the conference, will some of the recordings be available online later on for people who want to have a look at individual sessions or at the whole conference, binge watching the whole conference?
Yeah, so all plenary sessions, so anything that isn't a workshop, is recorded and available on our YouTube channel, which is linked from the website, and that typically goes up a few weeks after.
Yeah.
And also you can plan to come next year if you missed it this year. We are not 100% sure of the location yet, but we are in conversation about a possible location in Asia.
I'm going to put that in my calendar, but Asia again might be out of my league. Anyway, that sounds good. Time is running. We slowly come to an end. You mentioned the address from BuildUp a few times, so I think I'm going to put that in show notes. So if people want to learn more about your work and the resources you offer. Now comes the next one, and that's a bit steamrolling you. I don't know if you saw that in the notes. I ask all of the interview guests if they have one additional resource which is from beyond their own work. So something which is from another organization, another event, a video, a podcast, a piece of art, anything that relates to where digital and peace building meet, where emerging technologies and conflict transformation meet. Is there any resource you would like to share?
I really like the work of the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue on social media codes of conduct, but there's not all that much information out there. So
some other guest I asked mentioned your page, so I think that should be a highlight.
That's nice.
The free resources on BuildUp.
Yes, I know what I want to highlight.
The stage is yours.
I think one resource that is on an aspect of digital peace building that we haven't talked about, which is essentially the intersection of cybersecurity and peace building and mediation, is the Cyber Peace Institute's website. So the Cyber Peace Institute works mainly on humanitarian cybersecurity, let's say. So it doesn't just work with peace builders and mediators, it also works with humanitarian NGOs, but it just has a lot of really great resources on cyber threats. So if you want to understand, what are different kinds of cyber threats, what is happening in Ukraine that I should know about in terms of cyber attacks and how that's impacting the conflict, they're just a great resource, and they have a lot of stuff on their website to look at. So that would be my recommendation.
That sounds great. I must admit, I looked at their page ages ago and I haven't really visited in at least 12, maybe 15 months. So as another reminder for myself, and it might be another idea of trying to get someone from them to be on one of the future episodes.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Think about that. Helena, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you very much. And it's been great sharing all your insights, your experiences, and all the links to other resources around.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So much for today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of the future episodes. And I would really appreciate if you leave me a rating on iTunes, on Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more about the Peacebuilding Practitioner, head over to my webpage. That's www.thepeacebuildingpractitioner.org, where you find plenty of articles from practitioners for practitioners. And if you want to dive even deeper into this field of work, join us for one of our online courses. If you want to learn more about that, just get in contact with me. You'll find the contact details in the show notes or on my webpage.